Hello, my name's Tom Wilson, and in this screencast, we're going to talk about contributing to hyper63 and kind of walk through part one of creating a port. Hyper63 is a services framework that makes it easy to separate your business logic from your services or implementation details. Whereas you can then switch between services over time without having to modify your business logic. So what we're going to do today is add a port. Hyper63 uses ports and adapters, a pattern where you create a port and then you can implement many adapters for that port. And what we're going to do is go through the process of implementing a very simple port. It's not going to do much, but you'll get the idea and hopefully some of the concepts. So, with that, let's get started. Um, so, basically, a port is a specification that really kind of makes sure that your adapter implements the methods and the arguments and returns the correct shape of information for your application. That way, you could have a search port, for example, and then have several different implementations like mini search, Meli search, Elasticsearch, Kendra, and you want all of those implementations to follow the same rules so that when you do a search, regardless of the adapter, it's going to take the correct arguments and return the correct results. So a large part of the port is validation. And we'll use a validation library called Zod. And it essentially allows us not only to validate the shape of our inputs and outputs, but also wrap our functions or our methods with validation so that we can, at runtime, make sure that things are validated. Um, so, with that, let's go ahead and start to build our port. And our port for this session is going to be super simple. It's a echo port. So it's going to have one method on it. That method will take a string and then it's going to return a promise, and that promise is going to contain a string. So that's our port. Very simple, and mainly so that you can get a feel for kind of the steps of putting a port together. And then in another session, we'll do an adapter, and then we'll put it all together where you can load your port and adapter in Hyper63 and access it. So for getting started, we're going to create a new directory. We'll call it Hyper63 echo port. Actually, I might change that to um, port echo. And in Hyper, you have like a data port for data, structured data. You have a cache, and you have a storage port to store unstructured data like files and images. And you have a search port. Those are kind of the four built-in ports. And we're going to create this echo port here. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll open up a terminal, and then we're just going to make directory hyper63 port echo, and we'll cd into that directory. And then we're just going to initialize it as a npm package, and I use yarn, but you could use npm here. And actually, I'm just going to do yarn init -y, and that'll just default all the questions and answers. And then we're going to add Zod as our validation library. So we're going to choose Zod at next. which will give us the latest Zod version 3. And then I'm going to add some test libraries to help test this. So we'll do yarn add -d and then use tape. And tape is a test runner that's pretty small and gets the job done. And then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to use ESM modules or ECMAScript modules. And to do that, you need to make sure that you're running node version 14 or greater. Then we can go into package.json and we can add a new property type and we'll just say module. And then this way, everything that we build will be ESM or ES modules. So that's cool. Let's see. And let's go ahead and create our two files. So we'll have index, which will be our port specification file. And then we'll have index_test, which will be our test file. We're just going to go ahead and create those here. Cool. And I'm going to take my notes and I'm going to push them over to the side. All right. So let's work on index.js. What we're going to do is we're going to bring in Zod um, into our port module, and then we're going to create a schema. And then after we create that schema, we're going to actually run a validation check or a parse. And then finally, we're going to wrap our adapter and return it. So pretty straightforward. And with this, we get to use the Esm import syntax. So we'll do import, and we're going to say default as Z from Zod. And that will just allow us to reference Zod as Z, which is kind of its kind of default. And we'll export a function that will take an adapter, and then we'll define our schema. So we'll say this schema is an object. It's a port schema, so it's an object, and that object has one method called echo, and that method is a function. And that function has arguments, and one of the arguments is a string. And then it returns a promise, which inside the promise, so promises contain values and they unwrap when they resolve. So inside that is going to be another string. And just like that, we have a specification or a schema. So we're going to take that schema, and when we bring in this adapter, we're going to parse that adapter into an instance. So we'll say schema.parse, and we'll take the adapter. Now, what will happen is if for some reason that adapter doesn't match this schema, so when we do this parse, it's going to check it. And if it doesn't match the schema, it will throw an error. And we actually want that error to throw to actually alert the developer who may be using this port and use an adapter that adapter does not work for this port. That's super important. So we want the error to throw, and then we're going to wrap this echo method around a validate method on the schema. So we'll grab the echo kind of declaration here, this z.function, and we're going to call validate, and then we're going to pass in the echo function. And what that will do is basically when echo is called, it will validate at runtime that the right arguments and the right returns are happening, or it will generate an error. So, which is super helpful when you're putting these modular pieces together. So that's it. That's our port. Not too bad. Um, Now, what we want to do is we want to write a test to make sure that our port is doing what it says. So we're going to probably write two tests. We'll write a happy test and a sad test. So we'll open index test and we're going to import uh, tape, but we'll call it test because that just reads better. And then we'll import our port. And with ESM, I always specify the extension when referencing a file in the directory or inside the same project. Um, and I don't get any errors, so that's cool. Let's go ahead and create our first test. So we're going to do test verify port. And the way we'll test this is we'll just create a dummy adapter, right? So we're going to create an adapter, um, and we're going to implement this function, and it's just going to just return, let's say, hello, and whatever the string was, right? Let's do that. And now let's wrap it in our port. So we'll just pass it in here. And then we want to get a result. So we're going to await and call our echo function. And we'll just call it with world. And then finally, we're going to test it. So we're going to say, is res equal to hello world? And finally, we can end our test. Okay. So that's our test. And what we want to do is test it. So just going to open a new console and then just run node index test. And we can see that it passed. Pretty cool. So let's write a test that forces it to fail, right? So let's create a sad test. And again, we'll just use the double arrow syntax here just to save some typing. But we're going to resolve hello. Exact same implementation as above for our adapter. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that it throws an exception. Oh yeah, this is what we do. Okay. So we're going to wrap a try catch and we're going to initialize the port again. And then on catch, we're just going to say T okay true because we want it to actually throw, and we'll end. Um, Now, what we're going to do is actually misspell this. So implement it, but we misspelled the method. So in that case, we want it to throw. And to validate, we have to test passing. We can also look at the error. and rerun and see. Yep, it's invalid. It expected a function and it received undefined, and the path was echo, and it is required. So pretty cool. We've got our port. Now, because everything is modular, what we need to do is go ahead and kind of get it ready to push into NPM because we're going to publish it on NPM. So we want to init it as a Git repository. We want to exclude node modules from Git, right? We don't want that. And then we want to go ahead and just add everything to our repository. We're going to make sure that's good. Um, and what we want to do also is, as we push to Git, we want to include CI. So we want the test to run every time it gets pushed to Git. You can do that several ways. In this case, we're going to use GitHub Actions. So we'll need to make a new directory called GitHub/workflows. And then in that new directory, we need to put a new file called GitHub/workflows test.yaml or YML. And for that, we're going to give this action a name, test echo port, and on push, we want to run the following jobs. We want to do a build, and with Ubuntu latest, and then we're going to use the strategy pattern, which allows us to run with several different versions of Node. So we're only going to use one, but over time, we may want to add more than one. So we'll use 14.x. And then for our steps, we're going to first check out the code. So we're going to use the checkout action, and that's version 2. And then we're going to want to use Node.js. So set up Node, and that is a name use Node.js. And then we're just going to put the version from the matrix. So this matrix strategy will run a loop. We only have one, but if we added 3 versions in here, it would run the steps 3 different times. So, and then finally, we want to specify the node version that we want to use. Okay. So we've got our code checked out. We've got our setup, Node.js, and then what we want to do is run a couple of commands. First, yarn, which will install all of our dependencies, and then we'll run yarn test, and we're going to set the environment flag of CI true to let yarn know that we're running this in a CI, a continuous. It, I forgot what CI meant. So it's a continuous delivery environment. Um, continuous integration. That's CI, continuous integration. It is morning here. Okay, so we've got our action. And now we want, we're calling yarn test. So we need to add a script to our package JSON. So let's go into package JSON and add a test script. that. So to run our test, we just do index test.js, and that'll run our test. And now when we run yarn test, it should run our test. Cool. So we've got all that. We've got it committed to GitHub. Let's go ahead and just create a README so that when we see it in the future, we know what we're talking about. And I'm just going to copy this because it's not worth all the typing. But basically, we're just going to give it a description and then an example on how you would use this adapter. So we would import it or this port. So we would import the port, and then let's change this up here. So we want an adapter. So this would be adapter, and let's just say greetings. So we've got an echo port, and our adapter is greetings. And then what we want to do is add our greetings adapter here. So when you're configuring hyper63, you import the pieces you want to use, and then in this adapter section, you specify the port and you specify the adapter. And usually it's a function so that you can pass kind of environment information here. So if this adapter was, needed information to connect to a service or a database or whatever, you could pass it in here. So at, kind of initialization time, it would get that information and be able to roll. So that looks pretty good. So now we'll add all the stuff and we'll say first commit. And then we're going to just create a repo. I use a little GH utility from GitHub. So we'll say repo create hyper63 slash port echo. We'll make that public. It's my current directory. Okay, so it already exists. So, which is cool. That's probably from the demo I did last time. So let's do it my personal repo. So we'll do twilson63 like that. Public, yes. Cool. So we created our port on GitHub. Hopefully our actions are running. Let's go to GitHub and check it out. So let's just got our README. Oh, so we created the repository, but we hadn't pushed our code yet. So let's push our code to the repository. And now that that's pushed, we can come over here and refresh our repository. We've got our README. If we go to actions, we can see that our commit's running. And it passed. Pretty awesome. So with that, we have our code deployed in GitHub, and we go to our steps. So now we want to publish the NPM. So we're going to publish on the command line, but normally you would set this up in another GitHub action. So when you pushed or did a pull request to master or main, then that GitHub action would actually publish that. And maybe we'll talk about that in another cast. But for right now, we're just going to push this to NPM locally, or publish to NPM locally. And to do that, you need an NPM account. And what we're going to do is change this to T Wilson 63 using a scope. So T Wilson 63 is my account name. And then I'm going to call this hyper63 port echo, like that. Version 1.0. And then I'm going to log in using there we go. Yay. So npm publish, access, public. Cool. And now our port is on npm. So, like I said, you may want to set that up in your CI, but basically, and this is in the article, shows you how to do it. You can set up your token, and you can actually create a token that doesn't require um, two-factor authentication. So you go to npm and create that token and essentially build this GitHub action called publish. And then every time you push a change and you do a pull request and put it into your main repo or master repo, it will work. So that's it. That's setting up a port. And then tomorrow we'll go through creating an adapter for the port and publishing that. And then finally, we'll put it all together. So thanks for listening and watching my screencast. I hope this gave you some insight on how to create a port for Hyper63.